Don't be fooled by the smile. Don't be deceived by eloquence. There are people who speak like angels, but think like vipers. You see, discernment is not suspicion. It's divine perception. It's the ability to see past personality and into intent. Some of you keep getting hurt, not because you're weak, but because you keep confusing being kind with being blind. You're looking at how they treat you in public, but ignoring how they twist you in private. You're listening to what they say, but you're not discerning why they're saying it. And let me tell you something, evil doesn't always come dressed in darkness. Sometimes it comes disguised in light, speaking softly, offering comfort, pretending to care. But behind the flattery hides a motive. Behind the compliment hides a chain. Manipulators rarely come with knives. They come with smiles, promises, and attention. They study your wounds, not to heal them, but to use them. They learn your weaknesses, not to protect them, but to control them. And if you don't train your spirit to discern beyond appearance, you'll keep mistaking poison for perfume. That's why discernment is not optional in this generation. It's survival. Because not everyone clapping for you is celebrating you. Some are calculating you. Some are applauding just to get close enough to strike when your guard is down. But hear me, discernment is not paranoia. It's purity of perception. It's not seeing demons in every person. It's recognizing motives through the eyes of wisdom. It's the ability to hear beyond words and feel beyond gestures. Some of you keep letting the wrong people into your heart because you judge connection by comfort instead of character. You assume chemistry means covenant. You assume attention means alignment. But the enemy knows how to mimic love long enough to gain access. That's why discernment is not emotional. It's spiritual. It's not about how someone makes you feel. It's about what the Holy Spirit reveals when you listen. Discernment is like an X-ray. It shows what eyes can't see. It's that quiet awareness that something sounds right but feels wrong. It's that inner pause before a promise that seems too convenient. It's the warning you feel but often silence because you don't want to seem judgmental. Yet God gave you that sensitivity to protect you, not to burden you. You don't need to ask Him to remove the wrong people when you walk in discernment because you'll see them coming. Their patterns will speak louder than their professions. Their silence when you succeed will tell you more than their laughter when you fail. And you won't need confrontation to confirm what your spirit already knows. Discernment gives you distance without drama. Understand this, the enemy cannot destroy what he cannot deceive. So his first strategy is always deception, camouflage. He hides behind charisma. He wraps lies in truth. He cloaks manipulation with emotion. That's why discernment isn't about what looks spiritual, but what is sustained by truth. Because evil can mimic kindness for a moment, but it cannot remain consistent. It can act holy, but it cannot endure holiness. And if your spirit is trained, you will catch it, not through suspicion, but through peace. Because whenever something is not of God, peace departs first. Some of you wonder why God lets certain people hurt you. It's not punishment, it's revelation. Sometimes pain is the price of perception. You needed to see who they really were before they could take you further off course. You prayed for discernment and God answered with disappointment, not to break you but to protect you. So stop mourning what left and start thanking God for what was exposed, because exposure is grace in disguise. And here's the truth. Discernment doesn't make you superior. It makes you surrendered. You can't discern clearly if your heart is full of ego, offense, or assumption. True discernment flows from intimacy with God, not insecurity about people. It's not born from distrust, it's born from truth. When your spirit is aligned with heaven, you begin to see like heaven, past the surface, past the smile, past the noise. You stop being reactive and start being responsive. You stop being deceived by appearance and start being guided by revelation. You see, manipulation only thrives where identity is absent. If you don't know who you are, people will keep telling you who to be. They'll shape your values, your goals, your emotions, and call it love. But once you become anchored in your divine assignment, the fog lifts. When you walk in purpose, flattery loses its flavor. When you know your worth, manipulation loses its grip. Because purpose is not just a path, it's protection. Manipulators don't pursue the strong, they pursue the uncertain. They find those still seeking approval, still needing to please, still trying to earn validation by saying yes to everything. But when you know your assignment, you stop auditioning for acceptance. You stop confusing people's approval with God's confirmation. Purpose silences insecurity. It teaches you when to walk away and when to wait. When you live anchored in destiny, you no longer chase opportunity. You wait for alignment. Let me say this clearly. When your yes is rooted in purpose, every manipulative door becomes visible. You won't need to pray for clarity. You'll walk in it. You weren't made to be confused. You were created to be called. Purpose becomes your compass. Without it, you follow voices. With it, you follow vision. That's why the enemy doesn't fear talented people. He fears focused people, because a focused heart cannot be deceived by flattery. You can't outplay manipulation by using manipulation. You can't out-scheme deception by becoming deceptive. The moment you try to beat darkness with its own weapons, you lose, because now you're operating outside your authority. Dominion is not imitation of darkness, it's mastery of light. The enemy's language is confusion, but your language is clarity. His weapon is deceit, but your strength is discernment. So don't respond to his games, rise above them. And hear me, you don't overcome evil by being clever. You overcome it by being consistent. You don't win by matching the manipulator's tone. You win by maintaining your truth, because when you stand firm in integrity, deception exposes itself. Truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stay. So today, before you pray for new connections, pray for discernment. Ask God to sharpen your spirit, to show you not just who is around you, but why they're around you. Because the wrong people can sound right for a season, until your purpose demands the truth. And when that moment comes, don't resist revelation. Embrace it, because what God reveals, he intends to heal. What he exposes, he plans to replace. That's why discernment is not about fear. It's about freedom. Freedom from manipulation, freedom from confusion, freedom from counterfeit peace. When you walk in discernment, you stop being deceived by the charm of men and start being led by the wisdom of God. When God begins to teach you discernment, he doesn't start by exposing others. He starts by refining you. Because real discernment doesn't grow in suspicion, it grows in stillness. It comes from time spent in silence, not gossip. From prayer, not paranoia. The clearer your spirit becomes, the less noise can deceive you. Some people think discernment is about pointing fingers, but it's really about protecting your focus. You cannot see clearly if your soul is cluttered with resentment, insecurity, or distraction. You can't identify deception if you're addicted to attention. Sometimes the loudest voice around you isn't the manipulator's. It's your own need to be wanted. That's how many fall into emotional traps. They crave affirmation so deeply that they confuse manipulation with love. A manipulator studies what you need, then uses it as currency. They say what you long to hear. They offer validation wrapped in dependency. They present themselves as the one who understands you, but slowly they shape your choices until your peace depends on their approval. And when you finally notice the control, it's subtle, quiet, disguised as care. You start apologizing for things that aren't your fault. You second guess your own reality. You walk on eggshells to keep the connection alive. That's not love, that's bondage disguised as belonging. Discernment is what breaks that cycle. It teaches you that peace should not come at the cost of clarity. True connection never demands the death of your discernment. Real love doesn't need to control, it empowers. It doesn't twist truth, it embraces it. But manipulators thrive in confusion, because confusion weakens conviction, and conviction is where your authority lives. When your mind is clear and your identity is anchored, manipulation loses oxygen. It can only survive in the atmosphere of insecurity. Jesus showed this constantly. When the Pharisees tried to trap him with words, he didn't rush to respond. He paused. He read their hearts before he answered their questions. That pause is where discernment lives. It's the space between reaction and revelation. Manipulators count on your need to prove, to please, to respond instantly. They want to pull you into emotional conversations so they can control the tempo. But when you slow down, when you think before you speak, when you pray before you decide, their power dissolves. Wisdom dismantles what emotion can't detect. Discernment is not about always knowing what others are doing. It's about knowing what you're called to protect. Your peace, your focus, your spiritual clarity. Because when the enemy can't destroy you, he distracts you. And he often does it through people who look harmless, who sound sincere, but who secretly serve confusion. That's why you must pay attention, not just to words, but to patterns. Words can lie, but patterns always tell the truth. You'll see it in the timing of their praise, in the tone of their silence, in the way they appear when you're weak and disappear when you're strong. Evil rarely announces itself. It waits for exhaustion. It waits for distraction. It waits until your guard is down. And that's why discernment requires rest. Tired minds can't see clearly. Exhausted souls make emotional decisions that cost spiritual ground. Manipulators will always demand your constant attention because chaos keeps you controllable. But when you guard your rest, you regain your vision. When you stop chasing everyone's needs, you start hearing God's direction. You realize that not every cry deserves your response. Not every invitation deserves your energy. There is wisdom in waiting and strength in silence. The danger of ignoring discernment is subtle. You don't lose your peace all at once. It happens gradually. First, you excuse behavior because you want to believe the best. Then you rationalize manipulation as just their way. Then you start questioning your own instincts. Before long, your spirit is drained, your confidence fractured, and your purpose delayed. That's how spiritual fatigue begins, not from heavy battles, but from invisible compromises, from letting people sit in spaces your discernment warned you about. But when you decide to trust that inner conviction, everything changes. You stop forcing connections that God never approved. You stop trying to fix what truth has already exposed. You stop defending what discernment already revealed. Discernment brings peace, but it also brings separation, and that's the part many resist. Because when God gives you sight, He often gives you distance, not to make you lonely, but to make you ready. You can't carry divine vision surrounded by confusion. You can't walk in clarity holding on to counterfeit comfort. Sometimes discernment hurts before it heals. It will show you that the person you thought was your ally was actually your assignment to learn from, not to lean on. It will reveal that some prayers for reconciliation are really prayers for release. It will show you that God doesn't remove people to punish you. He removes them to protect the promise. And if you keep chasing what He's trying to separate you from, you'll delay what He's trying to give you. There is nothing cruel about boundaries. Boundaries are where discernment becomes discipline. It's not about who you cut off, it's about what you choose to guard. When you protect your peace, you protect your purpose. When you say no to manipulation, you say yes to clarity. And clarity is the soil where destiny grows. So pause before you answer, pray before you explain, wait before you defend. Because discernment will never shout, it whispers, it doesn't rush you, it grounds you. And once you learn to hear that whisper, you won't need to fear deception. You'll see it coming. You'll feel it shift the room. And instead of fighting in confusion, you'll walk in authority. That's what discernment does. It replaces reaction with revelation. And it turns every attempt to deceive you into a lesson that strengthens you. There comes a point in life when you realize not every open door is divine, and not every opportunity is meant to be taken. Some doors are traps disguised as blessings, invitations dressed in favor, pathways paved by manipulation rather than purpose. And discernment, real, mature, spiritual discernment, doesn't just help you recognize evil when it looks ugly, but when it looks good. Because not every light comes from heaven, and not every smile hides good intentions. The enemy has learned that in this generation, deception doesn't need darkness to succeed. It only needs distraction. Discernment teaches you to pause before stepping, to look beyond appearance, and to ask one vital question: who benefits if I say yes? That single question can expose an entire strategy. Manipulators always craft situations where they win through your obedience. They make it seem like your yes is an act of love, loyalty, or faith, but underneath, it's just a way to keep control. And that's why discernment is not emotional, it's strategic. It doesn't react to pressure, it responds to peace. It doesn't chase validation, it follows vision. Many people lose their discernment not because they are naive, but because they are hurried. They rush decisions, they rush connections, they rush confirmation. But wisdom doesn't rush, it waits, because clarity doesn't come in chaos, it comes in quiet. That's why Jesus often withdrew to lonely places to pray. Not because he was avoiding people, but because he understood that silence sharpens sight. In solitude, he wasn't running away, he was recharging his discernment. And that's what this generation has forgotten. We fill every silence with noise, every pause with scrolling, every quiet moment with commentary. Yet it's in the stillness that truth speaks loudest. Manipulators hate your stillness because when you're still, you start to see clearly. You begin to recognize the emotional patterns, the sudden guilt trips, the subtle flattery, the carefully timed apologies. You start noticing that their affection is selective, their loyalty conditional, and their kindness transactional. But as long as you stay busy trying to please everyone, you'll miss what your spirit is trying to warn you about. Discernment also means learning to stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Some conversations are not for clarity, they're for control. Manipulators don't listen to understand, they listen to reframe. They twist truth to make you doubt yourself, then use your reaction as evidence against you. That's why wisdom teaches silence. You don't have to win every argument to win your peace. Sometimes the most powerful move is to stop engaging, because the moment you stop feeding a manipulative dialogue, it collapses under its own lies. It's important to remember that discernment is not cynicism. Cynicism assumes the worst in everyone. Discernment recognizes what is real. It doesn't harden your heart. It strengthens your spirit. It doesn't make you suspicious of people. It makes you aware of patterns. The more you walk with God, the more your discernment transforms from defense to direction. You begin to see not just what to avoid, but where to go. God uses discernment to redirect your steps away from traps and toward alignment. Look at Joseph. His discernment didn't just protect him, it positioned him. He saw beyond betrayal and recognized destiny in disguise. His brother's manipulation couldn't destroy him because his mind was anchored in purpose. That's the secret. You cannot manipulate a mind that is anchored. Manipulation feeds on confusion, but when your spirit knows its assignment, confusion becomes powerless. That's why purpose is not just a mission, it's armor. It protects your focus from flattery and your heart from falsehood. When you walk in discernment, you begin to see that distance is not rejection, it's revelation. God removes access before he reveals intention. He doesn't expose everyone with drama. Sometimes he simply lets disconnection happen quietly. You might not get an explanation, but you'll get peace, and peace is confirmation. When someone's absence brings you clarity, it wasn't a loss, it was a lesson. The challenge for many is that discernment often feels lonely, because when you begin to see clearly, you can no longer tolerate what others ignore. You start noticing behaviors that others excuse. You recognize spiritual immaturity disguised as charisma. And while everyone else celebrates connections, you feel a quiet stirring. Something doesn't sit right. That's not arrogance, that's awareness. You're not judging, you're discerning. It's the cost of clarity, the price of seeing beyond the surface. But here's what few understand. Discernment doesn't just protect you from others, it also protects others from you. From the version of you that reacts instead of responds, that chases instead of waits, that seeks revenge instead of restoration. Discernment disciplines your emotions. It teaches you that not every betrayal deserves an explanation. Not every attack deserves attention. It gives you authority over yourself, and that's where real strength begins. Sometimes discernment will tell you to stay silent when your ego wants to speak. It will tell you to forgive when your pride wants to fight. It will lead you to walk away without needing closure, because closure is not always a conversation. Sometimes it's peace. And when you learn to follow that inner voice, manipulation loses its power completely, because now your boundaries are built on revelation, not reaction. You will start noticing that some people are only consistent when they need something. Their apologies arrive only when access is threatened. Their affection deepens only when they feel your distance. But once you've tasted peace, chaos loses its appeal. Discernment gives you the strength to love without losing yourself, to help without being used, and to forgive without reopening the door. And above all, discernment reminds you that you are not called to fix everyone. You are called to follow truth. Jesus didn't chase Judas when he left the table. He didn't beg him to stay, because discernment understands that some departures are divine. You can love people deeply and still let them go. You can bless them and still walk away. That's not bitterness, that's maturity. So let your discernment mature in silence, your peace grow in distance, and your purpose lead your connections. Because when your spirit learns to see beyond the smile, beyond the stage, beyond the sound of flattery, you'll no longer be fooled by charm. You'll be anchored in truth. And when you're anchored in truth, no manipulation can move you. There's a kind of quiet strength that only comes from people who have learned to see without reacting. Those who have walked through deception, not with bitterness, but with understanding. They no longer confuse kindness with weakness or love with unlimited access. They've discovered that peace is not found in trusting everyone, but in trusting God to reveal who truly belongs. And that's where discernment becomes more than protection. It becomes wisdom in motion. See, manipulators thrive in chaos. They depend on your need to respond, your desire to explain, your habit of overgiving. They draw you into cycles of guilt and obligation, because as long as you're trying to prove your goodness, they can control your choices. But discernment breaks that cycle. It whispers, you don't have to respond to every demand. You don't have to explain peace to those committed to misunderstanding it. It teaches you that silence is not weakness, it's strategy. The more you learn to hold your peace, the more you protect your power. Think about Jesus standing before his accusers. They demanded an answer, waiting for him to defend himself, to react emotionally, but he didn't. He remained silent, not because he was powerless, but because he was purposeful. His silence wasn't retreat, it was restraint. He understood that not every battle deserves a word, and not every question deserves a response. When your authority is spiritual, your greatest weapon isn't your voice. It's your control over when and how you use it. Discernment matures when you stop trying to convince others of your truth. Manipulators depend on your explanations because explanations give them material to twist. The more you talk, the more they weaponize your words. But when you stand in clarity, you realize you don't owe everyone an explanation. Some people don't want to understand, they just want access. They pretend to seek peace, but their goal is permission. And discernment helps you recognize that difference. Boundaries are what give discernment a backbone. It's one thing to see manipulation, it's another to refuse it. Boundaries turn awareness into action. They say, I love you, but I love my purpose more. I forgive you, but I won't reopen the door. This isn't arrogance, it's stewardship. You can't fulfill your calling if you're constantly distracted by chaos disguised as compassion. The world will tell you that closing doors makes you cold, but heaven knows it makes you wise. Even Jesus, the embodiment of love, didn't give everyone the same level of access. He preached to crowds, mentored 12, trusted 3, and shared his heart with one, the Father. If he guarded his space, why shouldn't you? Discernment doesn't just separate you from people, it separates you from pressure. It teaches you that saying no is not rebellion, it's responsibility. You are not obligated to exhaust yourself for those who refuse to grow. You are not heartless for protecting your peace. In fact, the greatest evidence of maturity is learning to love people while keeping boundaries intact. You can pray for them and still walk away. You can care deeply without staying captive. Because love without limits is not love, it's dependency. What most people call loyalty, God sometimes calls limitation. Loyalty without discernment becomes bondage. It ties you to people and places that no longer align with your purpose. And that's why discernment isn't just about identifying wrong intentions, it's about recognizing expired seasons. Sometimes the person isn't evil, but their role in your story has ended. Discernment helps you honor what was while releasing what no longer is. You stop forcing chapters that God has already closed. There's a dangerous illusion that being spiritual means being endlessly available, but discernment breaks that illusion. It reminds you that even divine compassion has boundaries. Jesus healed multitudes, yet often withdrew to pray. He performed miracles, yet disappeared from the crowd when they tried to crown him prematurely. Why? Because discernment understands timing. It knows when to engage and when to retreat, when to speak and when to stay silent. Not every opportunity is divine. Some doors are distractions dressed as destiny. Manipulators test boundaries by playing with guilt. They'll say, "You've changed," when what they mean is, "You've stopped letting me use you." They'll call your distance pride, your silence cruelty, and your standards arrogance. But discernment will help you hear what they're really saying. I can no longer control you. That's why spiritual growth often comes with isolation. Because once you start thinking clearly, confusion can no longer coexist with you. And here's the truth. Discernment doesn't make you lonely. It makes you selective. You start choosing depth over drama, alignment over attention, purpose over popularity. You begin to see that peace is not found in crowds, but in clarity. The more your spirit matures, the fewer explanations you need. You no longer chase validation because you've learned that God's confirmation is enough. Discernment transforms you from reactive to reflective. You stop absorbing other people's emotions and start observing their energy. You no longer take everything personally. You read it prophetically. You stop asking, "Why are they treating me this way?" and start realizing this is how they treat truth when it enters their comfort zone. And with that understanding, you stop trying to fix people who are committed to misunderstanding you. When you reach that level of discernment, your peace becomes your loudest statement. You no longer need to defend your boundaries or justify your distance. People who are meant for your next season will respect your space. Those who aren't will resent it. And that's the filter God uses, not to isolate you, but to insulate you for what's ahead. So don't mourn what discernment removes. Don't apologize for the space you protect. When God sharpens your spirit, it's not to make you suspicious, it's to make you strategic. You will begin to see that every disconnection was direction, every silence was guidance, every no was protection. Because discernment isn't about seeing evil everywhere, it's about seeing God's hand in everything. And once you walk with that awareness, manipulation can no longer touch you. You'll move with peace that confuses your enemies and wisdom that preserves your destiny. Discernment doesn't just change how you see others, it changes how you see yourself. It forces you to confront the ways you've allowed deception to feel like devotion, how you've mistaken exhaustion for obedience, and how you've confused self-sacrifice with spirituality. Because manipulation can't exist without permission. It needs your agreement to survive. And many times the manipulator's power doesn't come from their strength. It comes from your silence, from the moments you saw the red flags but chose to explain them away in the name of love, loyalty, or faith. There's a point in every believer's journey when God begins to show you that discernment is not just about avoiding harm, it's about alignment. It's about living in such a state of awareness that your peace becomes non-negotiable. You start recognizing that not every storm is sent by the devil, and not every opportunity is sent by God. Some storms come to shake what's unstable in you, to teach you boundaries, to expose where your love lacks wisdom. Discernment doesn't always sound like run. Sometimes it says learn. And learning begins when you stop blaming others for every wound and start asking, what in me keeps attracting what breaks me? That's when discernment becomes personal. Because before God gives you clarity about others, He will always give you clarity about yourself. He'll show you that part of spiritual maturity is admitting where you've ignored His warnings, where you mistook chemistry for calling, where you let flattery speak louder than truth. When you start walking in that kind of awareness, you begin to see manipulation for what it truly is. Not just a tactic of control, but a mirror that exposes where your confidence is still unhealed. Manipulation feeds on emptiness. It thrives in the hearts of those still searching for validation in human approval. But the moment you stop needing to be chosen by everyone, you become unshakable. You stop being moved by compliments or criticism because neither defines you anymore. You finally understand that purpose doesn't need applause to be legitimate. You begin to notice the subtle ways the enemy tries to re-enter your life. He no longer comes through obvious temptations. He comes through emotional distractions, through relationships that seem right but pull you off course, through people who sound like peace but carry confusion in their wake. But when your spirit is trained, you feel it immediately. That tightening in your heart, that subtle discomfort that says something's off. You may not have proof yet, but your peace is already speaking. And this time, you listen. Discernment also teaches you to protect your energy as much as your spirit. Not every conversation deserves your response. Not every crisis deserves your intervention. Some people don't want solutions, they want access. They want to keep you engaged in their cycle so they don't have to face their own reflection. And if you're not careful, compassion can become your downfall, because the manipulator's greatest trick is to use your goodness against you. They make you believe that saying no is unloving, that boundaries are unchristian, that peace is selfish. But God never called you to be drained in the name of love. There's a sacred balance between kindness and wisdom. Jesus loved deeply, but he also walked away quickly when discernment told him to. He didn't waste time trying to convince hearts that were unwilling to hear truth. He didn't chase validation from those who doubted him. His mission was too focused to be manipulated by emotion. And that's what real discernment does. It aligns your compassion with your calling. It teaches you that love without limits becomes idolatry. You stop making people your purpose and start letting purpose define your people. Sometimes the hardest part of discernment is accepting that not everyone who means well is meant well. There are people who genuinely believe they're helping you, but are unknowingly hindering your growth. Their intentions might be pure, but their presence still disrupts your peace. And discernment helps you release them gracefully, not in bitterness, but in wisdom. Because you realize that peace doesn't require an apology to be justified. When God gives you clarity, you don't need closure. The more you grow in discernment, the quieter your life becomes. Not because you isolate yourself, but because you've learned to filter your access. You no longer entertain every voice, attend every argument, or explain every decision. You stop living for optics and start living from obedience. You understand that not everyone deserves front row access to your journey. Some people are only meant to witness from a distance. And that's okay, because discernment isn't about cutting people off, it's about placing them correctly. The truth is, discernment will often look like loss before it feels like protection. You'll feel the absence before you recognize the deliverance. But with time, you'll see that every person who left was part of God's training. Each disappointment sharpening your perception, each betrayal refining your focus. You'll begin to thank God not just for what He gave, but for what He revealed, for what He removed, and for what He refused to allow. You start walking differently, calmer, slower, wiser. You stop trying to explain your peace to people who thrive on chaos. You stop mistaking movement for progress, because discernment teaches you that true growth is quiet. It doesn't need to announce itself. It simply shows up in how little things disturb you now, how things that once triggered panic now only provoke prayer. And maybe that's the highest form of discernment, peace that doesn't need proof. You no longer need to see the full picture to trust God's plan. You no longer need to understand every why to rest in His who. You've learned that wisdom isn't about having all the answers. It's about knowing when to stop asking the wrong questions. So when someone's words sound sweet, but your spirit feels uneasy, don't silence that inner warning. When an opportunity looks perfect, but your peace feels restless, don't rush. Wait, because discernment is God's early warning system, not to make you fearful, but to keep you faithful. It's His way of saying, I see what you can't. Trust me, not your emotions. And when you do, you'll find that discernment doesn't just protect your destiny, and it preserves your dignity. It reminds you that wisdom is not about outsmarting others, but about mastering yourself, about knowing when to speak, when to walk away, and when to stay still long enough to hear God whisper, this is the way, walk in it. Discernment matures the moment you stop seeing it as a defense mechanism and start understanding it as divine direction. It's not just meant to warn you about people, it's meant to guide you into purpose. Because sometimes what looks like rejection is actually redirection. Sometimes the door that closed wasn't the enemy blocking you. It was God protecting you from a path that would have diluted your destiny. But if you live by sight alone, you'll keep labeling protection as loss and favor as frustration. That's why discernment requires faith. It asks you to trust what you sense, even when you can't explain it. There's a kind of wisdom that only comes through obedience to that inner whisper. The one that tells you, not this one, even when everything seems perfect. The one that says, wait, when everyone else is telling you to hurry. That voice doesn't shout. It gently nudges, testing whether your desire for peace is stronger than your addiction to approval. Because discernment will always challenge your need to be understood. It will lead you to decisions others won't agree with, paths people won't applaud, and silences no one will appreciate. But that's the price of clarity. It often feels lonely before it feels liberating. You start realizing that discernment isn't a talent, it's a discipline. It's something you practice daily through alignment with truth. It requires you to quiet the noise of culture, of opinions, of ego. The more time you spend listening to the wrong voices, the duller your spiritual hearing becomes. That's why Jesus often withdrew, not because he was escaping the world, but because he was attuning himself to heaven. In a world obsessed with visibility, he chose solitude, and that's what made his perception unstoppable. He could see motives before they spoke, deception before it acted, danger before it approached. His discernment wasn't reactive, it was proactive. He didn't wait for betrayal to expose itself. He discerned it at the table and still loved through it. That's the beauty of mature discernment. It doesn't turn you into a skeptic, it turns you into a steward. You stop wasting energy trying to expose people, you just adjust your access. You stop fighting to prove who's wrong and focus on what's right for your assignment. Discernment doesn't make you dramatic, it makes you decisive. You no longer need to shout, defend, or announce your decisions. You simply follow peace, and peace does the explaining. Manipulators hate that, because when you operate through discernment, they lose their favorite tool, your reaction. They can no longer provoke you into chaos, guilt, or confusion. They can no longer twist your words because you've stopped explaining yourself altogether. You've learned that silence isn't emptiness, it's evidence that you've outgrown the game. And that's when discernment becomes authority, when you stop letting emotion lead your choices and start letting revelation lead your steps. Discernment also changes how you define love. You start understanding that love without truth isn't love, it's tolerance. And truth without love isn't strength, it's pride. But when the two walk together, discernment becomes unstoppable. You no longer rescue people who refuse to grow. You no longer feel guilty for saying no. You help without being used. You forgive without losing focus. You let go without losing grace. Because you've finally learned that loving someone doesn't mean letting them violate your peace. There's a dangerous lie that says compassion requires availability, but discernment exposes it. Jesus healed many, but he didn't heal everyone. He helped multitudes, but he never let the multitudes dictate his mission. Every time people tried to define his purpose for him, he walked away, not in arrogance, but in accuracy. He knew that misplaced compassion can become spiritual compromise. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face their own choices. Because if you keep rescuing people from the lessons meant to change them, you become their distraction, not their deliverance. Discernment will often require separation, but separation doesn't mean bitterness. It means clarity. It means you've learned to love from a distance without letting the distance turn into resentment. You can wish someone well without wanting them near. You can bless them and still build boundaries, because maturity isn't proven by how long you stay. It's proven by how wisely you leave. The deeper you go into discernment, the more you understand timing. There are things that are right but not yet. Doors that are open but not yours. Opportunities that seem divine but don't align. Discernment doesn't just show you what's good, it shows you what's God. It distinguishes between almost and ordained, between urgent and important. And when you start living by that rhythm, your life begins to slow down. Not because you're lazy, but because you're led. Discernment teaches you to read silence, to respect pauses, to trust peace more than pressure. It turns your spirit into a compass that doesn't chase directions, it reveals them. And that's when you begin to walk with grace, because you no longer fear missing out. You realize that whatever is meant for you will not manipulate you to get your attention. What's sent by God will not require confusion to convince you. And as your discernment matures, your prayers change. You stop asking God for signs and start asking Him for sight. You stop praying, Lord, open the door, and start saying, Lord, show me which door is mine. You stop begging for opportunities and start cultivating awareness, because discernment isn't about having more options. It's about recognizing the right one. The enemy doesn't need to destroy your destiny. He just needs to distract you long enough to delay it. He'll use noise that looks like opportunity, people that sound like partnership, relationships that feel like home but drain you quietly. But once you've learned to discern, his strategies lose their sting. You start to see patterns for what they are. And instead of reacting with pain, you respond with prayer. You step back, breathe, and say, not this time, I see it now. And that's when discernment becomes revelation, when your sight aligns with your spirit. You no longer walk blindly into traps. You no longer call confusion God testing you. You finally recognize that divine timing and human manipulation will never sound the same. One feels heavy, the other feels holy. One demands, the other directs. So stay sensitive, stay still, not fearful but alert. Because discernment is not about watching everyone, it's about listening to the one. When you do, you'll start seeing life not as a series of accidents, but as a guided journey. Every disappointment will start to look like divine redirection. Every closed door will start sounding like mercy. And every season of waiting will begin to feel less like silence and more like preparation. That's what discernment ultimately does. It shifts your focus from reacting to trusting. You stop asking why it happened and start thanking God that it did. You realize that discernment is not there to make you cautious. It's there to make you confident that you are being guided even when you can't see where the path leads. There comes a stage in spiritual growth where discernment stops feeling like a gift and starts feeling like a burden. Because when your eyes open, you can't unsee. You begin to perceive motives behind smiles, tension behind compliments, and emptiness behind applause. You notice when people are clapping out of habit, not honor. You sense when someone's interest is transactional. It's not that you want to see it, it's that your spirit can't ignore it anymore. And that's when discernment becomes both a blessing and a test. A blessing because it saves you from deception. A test because it demands that you stay gracious in truth. The greatest challenge of discernment isn't recognizing deceit. It's maintaining compassion once you do. Because when you see clearly, the temptation is to grow cold, to become guarded, distant, suspicious. But true discernment doesn't make your heart harder. It makes your love wiser. It teaches you to stop giving access to everyone while still wishing everyone well. It's the art of being open without being vulnerable to manipulation. It's learning that forgiveness and access are two very different things. There's a kind of peace that comes when you finally understand that you can release someone without hating them. You can pray for them without walking with them. You can love them and still move on. That's what emotional maturity looks like when guided by discernment. It's strength wrapped in gentleness. It's grace without naivety. Discernment isn't just about people, though. It's also about direction, knowing when to wait and when to walk. Sometimes confusion comes not because the path is wrong, but because the timing is. The spiritually immature think discernment is only for protection. The mature know it's for precision. You can be in the right place at the wrong time and still lose peace. God's will is not just what He wants, it's when He wants it. And discernment is the rhythm that keeps you aligned with both. That's why impatience is the enemy of wisdom. Many lose what was meant for them simply because they couldn't stay still long enough to receive it. The manipulator in your life may not even be a person. It might be your own impatience. That voice in your head that whispers, "You're behind, you're missing out, you need to move now." But discernment will teach you to question that urgency. Because what comes from God flows with peace, not pressure. If it's truly divine, it won't need to be forced. It takes real strength to pause when everything in you wants to push forward, to stay still while others are sprinting. But stillness doesn't mean inaction. It means preparation. It means you trust that God is working behind what you can't yet see. Discernment teaches you that delay is not denial, it's divine choreography. Sometimes God hides you, not to punish you, but to protect the promise from premature exposure. And when you truly trust that timing, manipulation loses its grip, because you no longer react to urgency created by others. You no longer chase validation or jump at opportunities just because they sound impressive. You wait for the one that carries peace. You wait for what aligns with who you've become, not who you used to be. That's how discernment refines your appetite. It teaches you to prefer quality over quantity, purpose over popularity, assignment over attention. The more your discernment matures, the quieter your ambitions become. You stop striving to be seen and start seeking to be aligned. You stop asking for more platforms and start asking for more presence. Not the presence of people, but the presence of God. Because discernment shifts your definition of success. It's no longer about visibility, it's about stability. Not about who knows your name, but about who shapes your character when no one's watching it. There's a serenity that settles in when you live by discernment. You don't rush anymore. You don't chase everything that looks shiny. You don't need to prove anything. You've tasted peace, and now peace has become your priority. You begin to measure relationships by peace, not by passion. You measure opportunities by peace, not by promise. You measure conversations by peace, not by curiosity. And anything that disturbs that peace becomes an automatic boundary. But discernment will also confront your pride. It will show you that sometimes the manipulator isn't someone else. It's your own fear. Fear manipulates you into settling for less, into believing that God's silence means His absence. It whispers that control is safer than trust. But discernment dismantles that illusion. It teaches you that faith is not passive. It's perceiving when to let go. It's trusting the unseen hand that moves slower than your emotions, but surer than your plans. Discernment will often isolate you for a time, not as punishment, but as purification. God will strip away noise, opinions, and distractions so you can recognize His voice without interference. That season will feel like emptiness, but it's actually recalibration. You're not losing people, you're regaining perspective. You're not falling behind, you're being fine-tuned, because discernment cannot flourish in chaos. It needs still waters to reflect clearly. And when you emerge from that silence, you walk differently. You listen more, you speak less, and when you do speak, your words carry weight. You begin to move with grace that others can't explain, because your strength no longer comes from confidence. It comes from clarity. You've learned that control is exhausting, but discernment is empowering. You don't have to figure everything out. You just have to stay aligned. Eventually, discernment becomes your compass in every arena: relationships, work, faith, decisions. You don't wait for confirmation from people who can't see your calling. You start trusting that subtle knowing, that inward peace that says, this is it or this is not for you. And every time you obey that voice, your life becomes simpler, stronger, and more stable. Because discernment isn't just the ability to see evil, it's the wisdom to recognize divine order. It's learning to see God's fingerprints in both the pain and the pause. It's realizing that the same hand that removed what you wanted is the hand preparing what you need. And once you understand that, you'll stop resenting the process. You'll start thanking God for every closed door, every uncomfortable silence, every divine no that turned out to be protection in disguise. That's what walking in discernment truly looks like. Not a life free from challenge, but a life guided through them. A life where peace, not pressure, becomes the voice you follow. And once you learn to trust that voice, no manipulation, no deception, no distraction will ever have power over you again. There's a kind of clarity that only comes after confusion, the moment when you look back and realize that everything that once felt like chaos was actually choreography. Discernment doesn't always make sense while you're in it. Sometimes it's only in hindsight that you see the hand of God threading purpose through your pain. Every detour, every delay, every closed door, they weren't punishments, they were protection. And that's when you understand that discernment isn't just about avoiding wrong people or bad decisions. It's about learning to recognize divine design even in disappointment. The hardest thing to accept about discernment is that it rarely comes with full explanations. God doesn't always tell you why He says no, He just gives you peace to walk away. He doesn't always reveal what's ahead, but He'll make what's behind unbearable until you move. And that's where faith and discernment meet, in the tension between what you feel and what you know. Discernment whispers, this isn't right, even when your emotions scream, but it feels good. It doesn't always show you where to go. Sometimes it just tells you where not to stay. You'll learn that clarity often comes at the cost of comfort, because the same light that shows the path forward also exposes what you can't take with you. People, habits, attitudes, they start to feel heavier, out of place. Discernment doesn't just separate you from danger, it separates you from distractions. It reveals the subtle weights that slow your purpose down. And when you begin to obey that revelation, your life starts to simplify. You stop fighting unnecessary battles. You stop explaining your choices to people who don't carry your vision. You stop chasing opportunities that require you to abandon your peace. There's power in realizing that discernment is not a one-time revelation. It's a rhythm. It's a daily decision to stay sensitive, to pause before reacting, to wait before committing. In a world addicted to speed, discernment slows you down to divine timing. It keeps you from mistaking activity for progress, because not all movement is forward, some is just noise. And discernment helps you know the difference. It tells you when to speak and when silence will say more. It teaches you that not every battle needs your voice. Some are won by your consistency, by the quiet strength of obedience. As discernment deepens, you begin to see that your greatest victories don't come from confrontation, but from control. Control over your tongue, over your time, over your emotions. Manipulators feed off reaction, but wisdom thrives in restraint. There's something disarming about a calm spirit in a chaotic world. When you no longer respond to provocation, you strip deception of its power. You learn to watch without absorbing, to hear without being moved, and that's when discernment becomes your shield. You'll notice that people who once had access to your emotions start losing their influence. Their words no longer pierce the way they used to. Their silence no longer disturbs your peace, because discernment teaches you emotional independence. You stop outsourcing your stability to how others treat you. You stop needing validation from those who don't value you. You start realizing that peace isn't found in people's approval, it's found in God's confirmation. Discernment will also teach you the beauty of small circles. You'll learn that not everyone can handle the weight of your calling. Some connections were only designed for your past, not your next. They celebrated who you were, but can't handle who you're becoming. And that's not a reason for resentment. It's a reason for gratitude, because every season of elevation requires a refinement of relationship. When God begins to enlarge your vision, He often narrows your company. Not because He wants you isolated, but because clarity can't survive in crowds. As you grow, you'll start recognizing that discernment and humility walk hand in hand. You can't hear God clearly when pride fills the room. Pride makes noise, humility makes space. Pride assumes, humility asks. Pride reacts, humility reflects. The more humble you become, the sharper your discernment grows, because pride hears through ego, but humility hears through spirit. And that's how you begin to make decisions that don't just feel wise, they are wise. There will be moments when discernment demands silence, when everything in you wants to speak. You'll sense betrayal before it's revealed, and instead of exposing it, you'll just watch it unfold. You'll discern deception before it's confessed, and instead of confronting it in anger, you'll step back and let truth do the work. That's when you'll realize that discernment isn't always about detection. Sometimes it's about direction. God will show you things not to accuse, but to prepare. He reveals not to shame others, but to shape you. And perhaps the deepest lesson discernment will teach you is this: not every loss is the enemy's victory. Sometimes losing is the way heaven wins. You'll lose relationships that drained you, opportunities that distracted you, and versions of yourself that no longer served you. It will hurt, yes, but with time you'll understand. Every subtraction was making room for addition. Every no was clearing space for something purer, something aligned. Discernment doesn't just teach you what to walk away from, it teaches you what to walk toward. Wholeness, wisdom, and unwavering peace. There's a kind of authority that only comes when your discernment matures, an unshakable calm, an inner stillness that can't be faked. People will wonder how you stay steady when everything around you shifts. They'll mistake your quiet for weakness, not realizing it's the silence of someone who sees beyond appearances. You've learned that truth doesn't argue, it just endures. You've discovered that peace is the loudest response to deception. So let discernment lead you, even when it isolates you. Let it refine your speech, redirect your energy, and realign your priorities. Because the more you follow that still small voice, the louder your purpose will become. Discernment won't just change how you see, it will change how you walk. You'll stop reacting to what's around you and start responding to what's within you. You'll stop moving from impulse and start moving from intention. And that's when life starts making sense in a way it never did before. You realize that discernment was never meant to make you cautious. It was meant to make you confident. Confident that even when you don't understand, you're guided. Confident that even when doors close, you're being directed. And confident that as long as you stay aligned with truth, no manipulation, no confusion, no counterfeit peace can pull you away from the path God has written for you. There's a quiet moment in every person's journey when discernment stops being something you pray for and becomes something you live by. It's no longer a sudden revelation that surprises you. It's a steady rhythm that guides your every move. You start seeing how God trains you to recognize truth, not by sight, but by spirit. He refines your intuition until it becomes a language, a dialogue between heaven and your heart. You don't just know anymore, you sense. You don't just hear words, you read weight. You don't just look at faces, you see fruit. Discernment at its core is spiritual sensitivity wrapped in self-control. It's not mystical or dramatic. It's subtle, constant, like the quiet hum of awareness that never turns off. And as it grows, you begin to live differently. You notice things others overlook, not because you're suspicious, but because your peace is too valuable to ignore discomfort. You catch the small details, the shift in tone, the pause before a promise, the smile that doesn't reach the eyes. You no longer justify what your spirit already revealed. But discernment is not about reading people. It's about reading yourself in the presence of others. It's noticing who you become around certain environments. Do you shrink? Do you strive? Do you lose peace to maintain connection? Because often discernment shows you not who they are, but who you're becoming by staying there. It exposes the version of you that compromises clarity for company. That's when you realize that spiritual maturity isn't proven by how long you can tolerate something toxic. It's proven by how quickly you recognize when peace has left the room. True discernment will challenge your empathy. It'll teach you that compassion without boundaries becomes a gateway for confusion. It will force you to redefine kindness, not as the absence of confrontation, but as the presence of clarity. You start to understand that being a peacemaker doesn't mean keeping everyone happy. It means refusing to let deceit live comfortably in your life, because real peace is built on truth, not avoidance. As discernment deepens, you start realizing that not every test from God comes through struggle. Some come through success. When everything starts working, when doors open easily, when people suddenly celebrate you, that's when discernment is most necessary. Because the enemy doesn't always attack with storms. Sometimes he distracts with comfort. He knows how to dress deception in reward. And if you mistake ease for favor, you'll start accepting things that were never sent for your growth. That's why discernment teaches you to pray, not just for open doors, but for the wisdom to know which ones to close. There's a moment when discernment turns your loneliness into a classroom. You start learning that solitude is not emptiness, it's clarity. The fewer voices around you, the louder God's voice becomes. You stop running from silence and start seeking it. You begin to crave it, not because you're escaping people, but because you've realized that peace isn't found in noise. It's found in presence, His presence. When you live like that, everything changes. You start noticing divine order in things that used to frustrate you. The people who left don't feel like loss anymore. They feel like alignment. The opportunities that fell through stop looking like rejection. They look like refinement. You understand that God never subtracts without intention. Every closed door carries an invisible not yet. Every pause carries preparation. You learn to stop demanding explanations and start trusting orchestration. Discernment matures you. It makes you quieter, gentler, but sharper. You stop wasting words on arguments that lead nowhere. You stop throwing pearls of wisdom into the hands of those committed to misunderstanding you. You no longer chase validation from voices that never valued truth in the first place. Instead, you start valuing discernment as your protection, not your punishment. And here's the paradox. The more discerning you become, the more misunderstood you might feel. Because people confuse peace with passivity. They think silence means weakness. They mistake your stillness for surrender. But you know the truth. It's not that you don't see what's happening. It's that you've learned not to react to everything that does. Discernment teaches you restraint. And restraint is the highest form of authority. With time, you realize that discernment doesn't make life easier. It makes it accurate. It gives you the precision to make fewer but stronger decisions. It gives you eyes that can tell the difference between seasonal and eternal, urgent and important, emotional and essential. You start prioritizing what carries purpose, not just what brings pleasure. You stop asking, does this feel right? And start asking, does this align with truth? Discernment will also shift how you view failure. You'll begin to see that mistakes are not proof of lost discernment. They're part of its development. Sometimes you need to choose wrong once to recognize right the next time. Every painful lesson becomes a sharpening tool. Every disappointment trains your instincts. Every time you ignored your intuition and paid the price, your spirit learned to listen faster. That's not failure, that's formation. The truth is, discernment isn't about perfection. It's about perception. It's about staying teachable enough to admit when you missed it, humble enough to course correct, and wise enough not to return to what God already revealed. Pride will always blind discernment. The moment you think you can't be deceived is the moment deception disguises itself as confidence. That's why discernment requires humility. Because awareness without surrender is just arrogance with vocabulary. When you finally embrace discernment as a lifestyle, peace stops being fragile. You no longer lose it every time someone leaves. You no longer question it every time God redirects. You stop negotiating with confusion. You wake up each day grounded, knowing that the same Spirit who warned you yesterday will guide you today. You stop obsessing over signs and start walking by sense. Not the sense of logic, but the sense of spirit. And maybe that's the quiet victory of discernment, the ability to walk into uncertainty without fear. You stop needing to control the path because you trust the presence guiding it. You move forward even when nothing feels clear, because clarity is no longer something you wait for, it's something you carry. That's the kind of discernment that turns ordinary people into instruments of divine precision. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't show off, doesn't seek validation. It simply sees, understands, and obeys. And when you live like that, you don't just avoid deception. You dismantle it by existing in truth. Your very presence begins to expose what's false, because a discerning heart doesn't need to speak loudly. It just needs to stay aligned. There comes a point where discernment stops being an inner whisper and becomes your natural posture. You don't strain to recognize truth anymore. You just know. The same way you can feel a storm before the sky turns gray, your spirit starts sensing shifts before they happen. It's not paranoia. It's peace with eyes open. You no longer wait for chaos to confirm what your soul already discerned. You trust your intuition, not as an emotional impulse, but as divine communication. Because discernment is not a reaction to life. It's the rhythm of living in alignment with God's flow. When you reach that level of awareness, you move differently. You stop confusing discernment with suspicion. You're not looking for what's wrong in people. You're listening for what's true in them. You learn that discernment is less about seeing flaws and more about recognizing purpose in yourself and in others. It's the difference between judging someone and understanding where they are in their process. True discernment doesn't criticize. It clarifies. It doesn't condemn. It calibrates. This is where most people get stuck. They think discernment means keeping distance, when often it means drawing near with wisdom. It's knowing how to love people without losing yourself. It's being able to stand in the same room as deception and not be contaminated by it. Discernment doesn't isolate you. It insulates you. It allows you to carry compassion into spaces that would have once consumed you. And here's the paradox: the stronger your discernment, the softer your spirit becomes, because you realize that everyone fights a battle unseen. The same intuition that warns you about manipulation also helps you see the pain beneath it. You start realizing that not every deceiver is evil. Some are just broken, desperate, afraid to be exposed. That doesn't excuse their actions, but it does explain their emptiness. And discernment without compassion quickly becomes arrogance. Mature discernment is quiet confidence, the ability to perceive without performing. It's what allows you to walk through a storm without absorbing its chaos. You begin to understand that not every confrontation deserves a response. Not every challenge demands your energy. You stop rushing to prove what God is already defending. You stop reacting to lies because you know truth doesn't need your panic to remain true. Discernment refines how you speak. Your words become fewer but heavier. You no longer waste explanations on those who have decided not to understand. You no longer use your voice to justify yourself. You use it to build peace. You begin to realize that wisdom is not just what you say, it's what you don't say. It's knowing the difference between revealing truth and releasing timing. Because discernment doesn't only show you what to say, it teaches you when to say it. And yet discernment will always test your humility. The more you see, the easier it is to think you're above others. But the more you know, the more you realize how much grace you still need. Discernment without humility turns into judgment. You can't read hearts correctly if yours is clouded with pride. The moment you start thinking, I would never do that, is the moment discernment begins to fade. True sight doesn't elevate you, it grounds you. You stop asking, how could they? And start praying, God, keep me from becoming that. As your discernment matures, you start living lighter. You stop clinging to control because you finally trust that God shows you enough for the step you're on, not the whole path ahead. You no longer demand to know everything. You simply listen, move, and trust that obedience will reveal what curiosity never could. That's the beauty of discernment. It frees you from the exhausting need to figure everything out. You learn that understanding is a gift, not a guarantee. There's also a quiet boldness that comes with discernment. When you sense truth, you no longer second guess it. You don't debate your peace. You stop apologizing for following what your spirit confirms. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable with your clarity. Because once you've learned to trust that divine nudge, you stop letting doubt play referee between your intuition and your obedience. The same peace that warned you is the peace that will lead you. Discernment also shapes how you handle favor. When doors begin to open, when recognition finally comes, when influence expands, discernment becomes the guardrail that keeps you grounded, because the higher you climb, the quieter deception becomes. It no longer shouts through chaos, it whispers through opportunity. It comes disguised as convenience, wrapped in applause, and if your discernment is dull, you'll start confusing attention for anointing. But when your spirit is sharp, you'll know that true elevation never pulls you away from humility. It pushes you deeper into it. Discernment doesn't just protect you from wrong people, it protects you from becoming one. It reminds you that wisdom without character is still deception, that charisma without integrity is still counterfeit. It keeps your motives pure, your intentions steady, your heart anchored in truth. It teaches you that success without discernment is just acceleration toward destruction. The greatest evidence of discernment is not how many people you avoid, it's how much peace you maintain. You begin to notice that spiritual maturity isn't proven by the noise you make when you're right, but by the peace you hold when you're misunderstood. You no longer need to announce every revelation. You simply walk in it. You let your consistency do the speaking. Discernment teaches you endurance. It shows you that sometimes wisdom means waiting in silence while God handles what your words can't. It gives you patience to outlast lies and the grace to not expose what God intends to handle himself. You begin to trust that truth doesn't need your defense. It just needs your discipline. And when you live like that, discernment becomes more than a tool. It becomes a temperament. You become steady, not shaken, focused, not frantic, peaceful, not passive. People will wonder how you can sense betrayal without bitterness, walk through storms without panic, and make decisions without doubt. But that's what happens when your sight belongs to God. Eventually, discernment transforms into revelation. The moment when your inner knowing aligns perfectly with divine timing. You no longer chase outcomes, you flow in purpose. You stop striving to avoid wrong turns because you've learned that even detours lead to destiny when you're listening. Discernment doesn't just protect your path, it purifies your perception until you no longer ask, "What if I'm wrong?" but rather, "Is my peace still intact?" And that's the final proof that discernment has done its work. You don't walk in fear of deception anymore. You walk in faith that even if deception appears, truth will always find you, because you and truth now share the same heartbeat, calm, steady, unwavering. And that's when discernment stops being something you practice and becomes who you are, clear, grounded, and unshakably guided.